Hi, and welcome to another episode of Swarajya Conversations. Today we have with us Jason Miller, the CEO of Gettr. But before he actually started the Gettr company as the CEO, he was the chief spokesperson for the 2016 Donald Trump presidential campaign and also a senior advisor to the 2020 Trump re-election campaign. Jason, it's great to have you with us. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. It's an honor to be with you. It's so exciting as we start to bring Gettr to India, and I look forward to teaming up with the Indian people. And this is one of the most exciting things is I also look forward to taking the journey to India, hopefully in March when the COVID restrictions lift. But I'm so excited to have so many new friends in India.
Wonderful. We look to have you here, Jason. Jason, I have to ask, we're talking about Gettr today as a platform for the pro-right voices, if you might put it that way. But what shocks us here in India was that when Donald Trump's Twitter account was suspended, just ahead of after the Capitol riots and the whole situation that unfolded there was a lack of response from the conventional American liberal that fancies freedom of speech so much. What really happened there?
Exactly. And I think you make a really good point. And I want to clarify one thing. In the United States, and obviously I can speak to the United States a little bit more clearly historically than I can with India, for example. So I want to be respectful of that. In the United States, the free speech debate has traditionally been in the center left. That's where it's been, whether it be the women's suffrage movement, when we talk about equal rights for African Americans and people of color. Traditionally, that's been viewed by the media as being more of a center-left debate. But now, ever since President Trump, the issue of free speech has largely been a center or center-right debate. And that is because it is so disproportionately hit a group at a political level or at an ideological level. And especially in the last couple of years, when we've seen President Trump being deplatformed from all social media, when we see people who want to question the true origins of COVID. Here's a spoiler. It came from a lab in Wuhan. Whether it was man-made or accidentally carried out, it came from a lab in Wuhan, and everyone's had to basically admit that now. It's now being viewed as largely a center-right debate. But I would say, let's take a step back and not say kind of who has free speech and who doesn't, but what's fueling it. And this goes, I'm answering your question, but I was just setting up a little bit. What's fueling it is big tech. And when I say big tech, when we're talking about the social media oligarchs in Silicon Valley, so Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, are now using political discrimination to decide who gets free speech rights and who do not. And it's not just unique to the United States. I tell my friends in America all the time that if you're frustrated with having 3 billionaires in Silicon Valley dictate your free speech rights, imagine if you live in India or Brazil or the United Kingdom, and you're saying, why are the Americans, especially this one small group, like 3 people in America, telling us what we can and can't say? So with President Trump, the fact that he had all of his free speech rights on the digital town square completely removed, I think that was an absolute egregious abuse of free speech rights, and it's part of the reason why we launched Gettr.
You make this point about political discrimination on social media platforms, and it's a very important point because since 2016, after the election of President Trump, we've seen that a lot on social media. It's not unique to American politics alone. It also happens a lot in India, especially to the voices which are pro-right. Our ministers have been on the wrong side of Twitter, apparently. But I mean, of course, you gave a little bit of history about the social movements in America. That's one reason. But if we go a bit deeper, why did it take so long for a platform like Gettr to come into being, to be mainstream as Twitter? And where do you look the future of platforms like Gettr, one of them being Gettr, of course, and other social media platforms? Because going forward, as and more people join the internet, especially in India, we are a nation of 1 billion internet users in the making. How do you look at the future of platforms that are detached, that are independent of the 3 big Silicon Valley giants?
So a couple of main areas. One of them, just to be very blunt, has been money. The fact that many of the platforms who have tried to go and launch have been unable to raise large funding because there is a lot of money to be made in the business side of social media, but you have to spend a lot of money to get there. The second thing is also the access to engineers and talent who can go and develop these platforms. For years, the critics in the media will say you have a free right to go and create your own platform, but as I mentioned, whether it be the funding or the access to engineers, that's very difficult to go and put all together. But I'll tell you, and I'm sad to say that even I fit into this final category until it happened. Many people, including myself, until we saw what happened with President Trump, never thought that the big tech companies would go this far to actually deplatform a sitting president of the United States. Just think about that for a moment. If all of a sudden all of the big tech platforms combined, all of them across the board, to say, Prime Minister Modi, you're not allowed to be on social media at all anymore. Just that thought. I never thought that it could get to that point, and I kick myself all the time when people say, what was the one thing you would have done different with the 2020 presidential campaign? I would have said, President Trump, we need to build our own platform and have it ready in advance of the campaign, because this could happen. If you had asked me that in 2019, I would say no chance. In 2020, no chance. 2021, he was deplatformed. And like he said, if they'll do it to me, they'll do it to you too.
You make a very important point about President Trump, the sitting, I mean, more than the party he represents, or more than the policies he represents or inherits as his presidential legacy, it's the office of the President of the United States, the man sitting in the Oval Office, who was deplatformed. And that is honestly very frightening. But in hindsight, of course, we have the benefit of hindsight here. If you go back to 2019 and you're in the third year of the Trump presidency, if you had the opportunity, would you tell the president then to invest in a social media platform, at least his presence, if not the money, his presence in an alternate social media platform? Would you do that?
It would be. If I had a time machine, I'd do a lot of things different in life, but that would be on a professional level. That would be probably one of the most important. Absolutely. One other thing I want to touch on that you'd raised just a moment ago, and that's one of the things that where I've been very frustrated with big tech, is that they have tried to define people who are passionate about their faith as being somehow outside the mainstream, or saying just because people want to exercise their faith, and in particularly, I think the Hindu faith, I think that has been unfairly discriminated against, where they've tried to paint people who are passionate about the rights of Hindu people, not just in India, but around the world, is saying that's somehow confrontational with other religions. I think that people should be completely proud to embrace their religious heritage. They should not feel discriminated against by people who say that they should not exercise their faith. And I do think that ultimately, as people are more embracing of their own faith, again, regardless of what faith that is, I think that ultimately brings us together as a world, because I think people usually have a lot more respect and for the teachings of their respective faiths.
So the next question I have is in two parts. And for the people who have not accessed Gettr yet, I do recommend look for the app on the App Store, look on the website. It's a wonderful, wonderful platform. You should sign up right away. It's a very engaging social media platform. But that brings me to my two-part question, Jason. One, you're creating a platform that will rile up a lot of people in Silicon Valley, that will rile up a lot of people on the center left or the leftist part of the political ideologies. You're riling up a lot of people, and for the right reasons. So what are the challenges that you encounter in building a platform like this? Because at the end of the day, Gettr is hosted on the App Store of two Silicon Valley giants, which also have the authority to deplatform apps. That's also a possibility. So one is the challenge in creating a platform as important as this. And two, what are the lessons you can share with some future entrepreneurs? Because a lot of countries are now looking at the prospects of creating their own social media networks, their own voices, be it the center right, be it the center left. So what are the lessons would you like to share with them? So the challenges and the lessons.
Absolutely. So I would say the number one challenge is and it's kind of a challenge and a lesson as well, is that it's all about the user experience. We can have these talks, yourself and me, or with Silicon Valley or the media, but if a challenger product is putting up is inferior in nature to something that big tech is offering, the user isn't going to look and say, well, this social media platform isn't very good, but they've only been around a few months, versus this one that's really good, very functional, it's smooth, it works great. and it's 10 times better, but they've had 15 years to get it right. They're going to go with the product ultimately that is better. And so our challenge and the goal ahead of us is to be just as good and then ultimately better than anything that Silicon Valley and big tech has. And so that's a high bar that we set for ourselves, because we know that people aren't going to self-select to be with the inferior product. So that's kind of really one of the biggest challenges. The other thing that I'd say on a daily basis, two things that you have to realize are really both with the security, both of the threats, whether it be hacking attempts to, whether it be the software, the mainframes, things of that nature. Security is big, then also moderation. And where we have decided as a platform is that our goal, what really truly makes Gettr different, is that we support free speech and we oppose cancel culture. And so if you believe in those two things, then we think that you'll have a great home and you'll be a great community member here with Gettr. But in order to do that, we also have to make sure that the community is safe. And we have to make sure that people can exercise these political beliefs, but they're not going to be physically threatened, that there's not going to be illegal activity, that there are not going to be racial or religious epithets, there's going to be no examples of pornography. Those are some of the community guidelines as more broadly outlined in our terms of service. And so those are the things, some of the challenges as you put that together. And then I'd say, as far as lessons or pieces of advice that I could give to other people, just very simply make sure that you have good funding, good investors, and then have a thick skin, because it's always going to be a challenging ride, but the payoff is definitely worth it.
Jason, I've spent a considerable amount of time on Gettr before speaking to you. I was going through the profiles over there. I was going through the conversations over there. And I was mighty impressed by the number of Republicans, especially senators and people in the Congress, who embraced that platform. And also a lot of people who are ardent followers of the Republican Party back in the United States. And I'm guessing a lot of them feel censored on Twitter or on Facebook. But tell me something, when you started with Gettr, how difficult was it to get all these Republican leaders and the followers on the platform? Difficult was the convincing part that, look, here is a pro-right platform. Here is a platform that doesn't censor you. Come join it. How difficult was that? Because by the looks of it, you've done a phenomenal job of getting all of them on board.
Well, thank you very much. I do have to say we have a very excellent team that's been doing it. So I'm just a beautiful face that goes on TV. That's a joke for anyone who didn't catch the irony. But I would say with this, the biggest point of pushback I had wasn't so much that people were frustrated with big tech or that they weren't willing to take on a new challenge. The biggest challenge that we had is there was a platform called Parler, or I guess they're still in existence, but they at one point had something like 18 million users, and they were growing quite fast. And then they were shut down as a platform after January 6th, after the violent events at the U.S. Capitol. And the reason why people were slow to, even though we grew by 1 million people in the first 3 days, which is a phenomenal number, but the reason why it could have been even bigger is a lot of people said, you know what, I spent the time and effort to build my platform on Parler, and I previously had it all completely removed and deplatformed. People just didn't want to have that again. And so at a certain point, you can't talk your way through it. You have to show people you have a good product. You have to show that it's going to be resistant to attacks on security. And you have to show that you're going to be mature and grown up with your moderation process. And then people will feel comfortable to come join you.
And how soon do we have the 2024 Republican nominee for the Oval Office on Gettr, if you know what I mean?
So a great question on that. So I'm in pretty regular contact with President Trump, and we probably talk, I would say maybe every other week is probably about how often we talk. And sometimes it's about politics, sometimes it's a little bit about life and things like that. But I'm obviously, when it comes to politics on Gettr, I'm never going to pretend to be someone I'm not. I'm always going to say that I'm conservative Republican. That's where I am. But Gettr is always going to be open to people across the ideological spectrum. If you're on the left, if you're on the right, you can feel free to come on Gettr and criticize me, talk about football or cricket or your animals or anything you want to. I do think that President Trump, specific to your question about 2024, I do think President Trump runs for election again in 2024. I think that announcement comes after the US midterm elections sometime this fall. I think that's more the realistic than not. In fact, I'm very confident he runs and that he is the Republican nominee. If President Trump does not run in 2024, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis will probably be the overwhelming favorite to go and take that. Here's the thing that might be interesting for a lot of folks in India. It might be less of a surprise after the minor incursion comments by President Biden yesterday in the United States with regard to Russia in Ukraine, which is an epic disaster of a press conference if I've ever seen one. I don't think President Trump will be running against Joe Biden again. I think it's more likely to be someone like a California Governor Gavin Newsom or a Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. I think are more likely. I think Biden. I don't see how Biden can stand for re-election.
Right. Okay. Gettr is now going to be amongst the big boys of Silicon Valley 1 year from now, 2 years from now. So, Jason, you will also have the same set of challenges that present themselves to the big tech, other Silicon Valley giants when it comes to the US government. There are talks about political discrimination. We keep hearing Congress calling for Mark Zuckerberg or the Google CEO or even Tim Cook for that matter as to how the censorship works, how all those things works. So from an Indian perspective, we really are interested to know that how is the political establishment looking at the future of big tech in the United States? Are they looking to break them up? Are they looking for ways to hold them more accountable when it comes to voicing people, when it comes to people voicing their opinions online, censorship, things like that? So what is the future of big tech from that perspective in the United States?
Really, really good question. I would say that right now, you would think that Democrats, while they're in control of both the House and the Senate, would start taking some action for reforms. But here's what folks in India and other places need to realize. Big tech has a very powerful lobby, a very powerful special interest funding apparatus in Washington, and they're able to slow or ultimately stop many reform efforts. I do think that after Republicans retake the House this fall, so going into early 2023, and they retake the Senate, I do think that there will be congressional action as far as reforming Section 230, which is the part of the US legal code that gives platforms effectively immunity based on whatever is posted on their platform by users. The one thing that I would say here is I would say that I would think that Republicans will go and do it, but I always get worried when we put all the responsibility into the hands of government. And I can speak a little more clearly to American government, but too often when we're looking for government to come up with a solution, they let us down in a lot of ways. Maybe it gets mucked up with too many different voices, or the special interest takes some of the teeth out of the reforms. And even you could say with regard to the courts for that matter, the courts seem to move about as slow as molasses and never seem to get it done. That's why myself and the rest of our team members decided that we had to have the free market solve this problem and put forward a very good challenger product, because it could take Congress or the courts so long to act.
So, Jason, now you spoke about the Republicans taking back the Congress and the Senate. And if you look at the American politics of the last 100 years, and I was just reading up, there is a redistricting that will happen before the midterms this year. And the Democrats are, of course, not favored to win the midterms, as any party is when it comes to the first midterms after they get elected to the White House. So how good are the Republican prospects for the upcoming midterms, and what would be the factors weighing in on the minds of the American people?
Another excellent question. So, folks, make sure everybody understands this. In the US, you're elected to the 4-year terms for president. You can run 2 of them back to back. The 435 members of Congress, the lower body, all of them stand for re-election every 2 years. And then in the Senate, which has 100 members, it's split up into thirds. And so every 2 years, a third of them are up for election. The first midterm that a president has, usually they get wiped out, for lack of a better term. And that's because they just finished a campaign where it's a battle between 2 different positions. And so say, for example, it's Biden against Trump. Biden's platform pretty simply was, I am not Trump. That's what he ran on his platform. He ended up getting the electoral votes and was declared the winner. And so, but then once the Joe Biden becomes president, he doesn't have the contrast anymore of being able to say, I'm not Trump. He can try, but it doesn't work. And then all the responsibility falls to them. So usually it's a big blowout, a big wipeout for the incumbent president for his party in that first 2 years. I would say that at a low end, there'll be 60 seats in that lower chamber, the swing from Democrat to Republican. At a high end, maybe as high as 80 seats, even potentially. And then in the Senate, really, you only need a swing of one, possibly two seats to go and put it in control for Republicans. It's a 50-50 tie at the moment. There can always be a couple of last minute retirements or different things that shift the numbers. But if Republicans then have both the House and the Senate, I would say the years of 23 and 24 largely become a gridlock, and not much of anything really gets done until the next presidential election in 2024.
That's why they say, Jason, that in America, the most productive years for any presidency is the first 100 days. Perhaps they say it for a reason. But in India, a lot of people are curious because they have been following the American politics for a while now, since the era of George Bush, at least the people in my generation. Everyone had high hopes from Joe Biden. We all have seen how it's just fallen apart. I mean, for the lack of a better phrase, I was watching the press conference last night. His response with respect to Russia, Ukraine, all of it, it's all falling apart. So a lot of people in India are curious, and I'm sure across the world and in America also. Of course, a greater amount of clarity will come after the midterms. But Donald Trump for 2024, I mean, we don't know what we are no longer audience to his very eccentric tweets. But will he be running for president? Will he get that backing from the Republican Party? Or will there be resistance from the party itself, citing the Capitol Hill situation, the law and order situation that happened back in 21?
So if the election is at this moment, President Trump wins the primaries by an average of 50 to 60 points. Nobody's even close. I would say that maybe there's a chance a second place competitor could maybe get into the double digits, but President Trump wins it very handily, just an absolute blowout. That's right now. Obviously, we're 3 years away from a general election. We're a solid 2.5 years away from most of the primary process. But it's a long road to the coronation, as they say. There are many things that could come up. Obviously, President Trump is facing the challenges with whether it be the legal system in the state of New York that's attacking his businesses, whether we see Capitol Hill with what they're trying to do with the January 6 committees, things of that nature. But I do think that the battle lines have become so hardened over the last couple of years. I mean, President Trump went through 2 impeachments, which there'd only been 3 presidents before that had any sort President Trump was the third to have any sort of impeachment. So he's number 3 and number 4. So he has 50% of the impeachments in all of U.S. history. The battle lines have been divided. So if you're looking at it from the outside, and again, not even just from India, say if you're a casual observer of politics in the United States, and you look at it and say, boy, the press attention for President Trump has just been so negative lately. How could he ever win? You got to remember that his supporters, his base is so hardened that they no longer pay attention to the mainstream media and the criticism of President Trump. And so I think it's important to realize that for understanding that's why, look, the presidential election in 2020 was only 44,000 votes over 3 states. Joe Biden, because of the way we use the electoral college, think about that, 44,000 votes over 3 states. That's a coin toss in a lot of places with as big as America is. And so I would say President Trump most likely to win. It's a long journey.
Of course. I mean, if you look at 2020 elections, of minus all the faults, though in India, we were pretty shocked the way the elections happened in the US. But you look at the number of votes Donald Trump was able to pull across America, you're pretty correct that his support base has, in fact, only must have hardened since then. But looking beyond the questions of American politics, a bit to the geopolitics, one reason why Indians and people across the world, especially in Asia, took great interest in the Trump presidency was because of his take on China. Now, a lot of people may disagree, but the way Trump was handling China was actually a very, how do I say, a move in sync with the times we are in, because he was looking at the unfair trade practices of China, the way they have taken over the WTO, the way they've made the world their dumping ground for cheap products. So that way, Donald Trump was looking very, very correctly on China, and Biden has gone back to the same Russia strategy, which is, more of to do with the Cold War era that has gone. So if you look at the India-US relations, how do you look at them? One, in the Biden era, how do you look at them then? And two, India in the US and China equation. How do you look at that?
Another excellent question. So going and taking a step back, here's my biggest concern as an American citizen, but also someone who firmly opposes the CCP, who very much wants to see the free people of China say that they're tired of the oppression, the authoritarian regime of the CCP, and make a change. So that's my worldview. That's where I look at it. The problem with having such a weak US presidency at the moment is it emboldens authoritarian leaders, whether it be a Xi Jinping or Vladimir Putin. It emboldens them to make the action. So, for example, if you're President Xi, it's a matter of when, not if, during the term of Joe Biden, that he goes and retakes Taiwan. And to be clear, China could retake Taiwan in about 15 minutes. And it's not just about Taiwan. Then China obviously looks even further to the east and says, okay, well, what about Japan? What are we going to? How long until they're in China's grasp? Same thing with Vladimir Putin and with Russia. It's a matter of when, not if, Putin has a minor incursion or a major incursion to go into Ukraine to take
We still don't know what minor incursion means, really.
Yeah, neither do I. So it's the minor incursion. I mean, I saw their cleanup spin of trying to say, well, it could be just cyber or paramilitary. So cyber or paramilitary are okay. So it has to be an actual Russian MiG fighter that flies over Ukraine to then be a real incursion. I don't know, but minor incursion, I think, is going to go down in the annals of political history of people saying, this was a defining moment that ends up on bumper stickers and things of that nature. But so here's the point: the weaker U.S. presidency emboldens these folks, and so then you're putting other nations at risk. And it's not even just the obvious ones, say like a Taiwan and a Ukraine, but think about our allies in the Four Corners, for example. Think about our allies, our important allies, whether it be Japan, whether it be South Korea, whether it be Australia, whether it be India, which is especially the Indo-Pacific theater. And this is where I'm getting to, is the fact that India is, I would say, probably the single most important strategic ally of the United States over this next century, because the future of human history is going to be determined by the outcome of, and when I say the West, but I also include India as far as the being the pro-democracy ballots to China's CCP, and who wins out with this race, whether it's the free people or the authoritarian regimes. And India is the key partner of ours in the Indo-Pacific region, and our relationship has to be good. Our relationship has to be, because we're both democracies, we both have free people, and China looks at both of us as threats.
Right. You make this important point about the weak presidency, and I can't stress this enough. Those images from Afghanistan last year on 15th August, that was when we were celebrating Independence Day, that really put a big question mark on the American leadership we've come to admire after the Second World War, after the Gulf War in the 90s. And people were wondering, is this the same United States that used to proud itself as international policeman? Now, if a China looks at that, of course, they feel very optimistic about recapturing Taiwan. And sadly and realistically, they can do it in less than a day. The same happens with Russia, which is now happening in Ukraine. And even economically, China would want to flex its muscles in South America and Africa, and they've already been doing that. But where is the presidency's? There's one criticism the current establishment in the White House has, is that they're clueless on China as to how to tackle China. But are they also clueless as to how to go about the Quad, which is the partnership of India, America, Australia, and Japan?
Yes, I think so, and that's because the Quad allies are looking and saying, well, and just reverse one thing. Last night, when we talk about the example of the minor incursion press conference, which for anyone who's watching, this is the disastrous Joe Biden press conference that was held on the eve of his 1-year anniversary of being in office. And I think his team strategically thought that if Joe Biden went out there and just took on head to head all of the challenges that Americans are facing, that he would have better headlines going into his 1 year anniversary. Well, what happened was Joe Biden went out there and very much sounded like a creature of Washington. He name checked and listed every problem, every malady the people of America are facing, and effectively tried to give his answer to all of them. So he owned and reminded people of everything going wrong in the United States, and also then basically very much owned what was happening. And so as we then get to say the minor incursion, and that's the headline that's going to dominate globally for the near future here, NATO allies then look, whether it be Germany, whether it be bigger countries like Germany, countries that are a bit smaller like Poland or Belgium or other places, they're going to look and say, uh-oh, the US is not going to be here to defend us. Biden is even projecting that NATO is split. So what happens is most of the world right now is focusing on the European theater. But the bigger picture, as you reference with the Quad, is where's India, where's Australia, where's Japan? And the free people and the leaders of all these countries, as we go again, South Korea, we got all the free countries who oppose communism, and everyone else around the world. It's not just Europe. They're saying, uh-oh, is America going to be there to have our back? And are they going to be focused? Because we know, since we're right next door, literally right next door to China, and we know the threat that's right in front of us.
Jason, my one final question, and this is beyond big tech, this is beyond politics, this is beyond geopolitics, diplomacy, beyond China, and even beyond the Republican voters. Tell me, in India, we are curious to know this, that an average Democratic voter, an average staunch supporter of the Democratic Party today, how is he or she viewing the first year of the Biden presidency? Every day rather, in India for the last year, we've just got reports of how many people have, have died because of the coronavirus in America, how there has been a shortage of the healthcare infrastructure, everything we've read. But how does an average Democratic voter, I won't even go into the Republican voter, that voter has already made up their mind. How does an average Democratic voter view the Biden presidency right now? I mean, look at Kamala Harris. She was telling that if people need a COVID-19 test, they can simply Google. The vice president was making that statement to a television channel. So what are the people who very optimistically voted for Joe Biden actually feeling right now? Can you give us some perspective on that?
Absolutely can. And another thing that's important for folks to realize is that Biden's numbers are the lowest ever for any sitting president at the 1 year mark of their presidency. But here's the kind of the buried lead that many people don't discuss. Biden has not even hit his floor yet. He still can go further lower. And here's why. He does not enjoy the same support for some of the traditional Democratic constituencies that most Democratic presidents have. In particular, his support with the African American community, his support with the Latino American community, his support with the Asian American community, his support with the Indian American community, his support with the Jewish American community. That's because President Trump received a record number of votes from these communities for a Republican, and the best since 1972. And so even though there was this perception with President Trump that he's this America First president, that he only cares about his small group of people, because of largely his economic message, he was able to have a record performance of these groups. So the reason why I make that point is there's a certain, what they always say, a baseline, or kind of the floor, the foundation of what any Democratic president is going to have. But Biden's essentially base is going to be smaller than typical, because people have, number one, whether they like Trump or they thought Biden was weak when it came to, obviously Biden has made some disparaging comments in the past about Indians. Biden has made some comments that were viewed, and particularly some of the members of his family, as being disparaging toward African Americans. And obviously, with a massive misstep by Biden was to embrace the Black Lives Matter movement. And what that did was turn off the Latino American community. Because here's the thing that a lot of folks in the mainstream media in the US don't get. They think the only reason why folks from Latin America come to the US is for a better economic opportunity. It's not purely that, it's security as well. If you go to a country, I was in Colombia earlier this week, And if you're in most neighborhoods, or say nicer neighborhoods, people have 9-10 foot walls all around their house. It's because there's a threat of security. People don't feel safe, even if they're in a good part of town. And so people not only want to come to the US for better economic opportunities, they want better safety and security. So when Biden embraced the rioters and looters of the BLM movement, he turned off the Latino American community. And I think that will be a potentially decade or longer hit to Democrats. So to the point, if you're a typical Democratic voter, you're looking right now at empty shelves, supply chain crisis, inflation, gas prices, porous southern border, minor incursions, whatever the case might be. You're looking to see what other Democrats might be available for 2024.
Yeah, if you're a Democrat, you're just wondering what next could go what could go wrong next, basically. But Jason, it's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for your time. And we look forward to Gettr. I recommend everyone to discover this platform. It's a new platform, one that is without the censorship of the conventional social media platforms we all are struggling with in some capacity. But thank you so much for your time, Jason, and I wish you all the best with Gettr.
Thank you. And I would just say in closing, that in addition to the fact that we have this great platform and we embrace free speech, we're making it fun again. I think for too many people, Twitter in particular has become just this cesspool of negativity. I think social media can be a force for good, for helping to expand democracy. And I think it can be fun, where you connect with your friends and family, you get breaking news, you get to post fun things. That's also part of the spirit I'm trying to return to social media. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason.